What happens when parasocialism goes both ways? We always talk about the lonely viewer sitting in the dark, obsessed with their favorite VTuber. But what if the streamer is just as desperate and broken, manipulating the people who worship her while depending on them to keep herself sane? This is Elfinpsyop, a small indie VTuber viewers often described as having a femcel/Tomoko Kuroki-esque aesthetic. If you've never heard of Tomoko, she's the protagonist of Watamore, an anime about socially inept, lonely girl who craves attention and affection but has no idea how to interact with people normally. That's the vibe Elfin radiated on stream. Awkward, doom posting, perpetually online, going for that whole mentally ill vibe, except I'm not entirely sure it was just a vibe with her. She wasn't a corporate idol with thousands of fans, but her small community was fiercely loyal. Drawn to her raw vulnerability, her throne wishlist, basically Amazon for streamers, was always filled with gifts from supporters. She never branded herself as a GFE streamer, but she definitely reaped some of those perks: daily emotional support, constant validation, and fans treating her like their personal comfort streamer. In most parasocial relationships, fans project onto a creator who remains distant, but here the parasocialism went both ways, creating a twisted web of intimacy, betrayal, and scandal that ended with a 51-page exposé, a deleted Discord server, and an apology stream that started with a song about CIA mind control? This is the story of Elfinpsyop, the femcel VTuber whose desperation for connection turned parasocial bonds into mutual chaos. Elfin's content wasn't polished idol karaoke or corporate tier ASMR. She streamed scuff games, doom-posted memes, trauma-dumped, and sang unironically. Fans described her as a doomer VTuber, a chronically online neat with an edgy, unhinged vibe. She even got banned on Twitch once for what she claimed was no fucking reason, though it turned out she flashed her TOS breaking model on stream as a joke, then promptly had a crash out about it. In her own words, she had no friends in life, worked 2 jobs to survive, and used streaming as an emotional outlet. Her viewers weren't just fans, to her, they were friends. And that detail is critical to understanding the scandal that followed. On April 18th, dropped a document that exposed her. It was 51 pages long, written by a longtime supporter and close friend known as Average Bird Enjoyer, someone who helped her with server moderation and backend things at time. And I suppose scorned lover now? ? The doc opens by stating, "I did not anticipate needing to put together this document. The true nature of this situation made that seem impossible." The author writes that Elfinpsyop's public statement effectively amounted to slander. Initially, this sought to provide evidence on how Elfin manipulated her fans and people around her for her own gratification, then accused them of manipulating her to avoid consequences. He states the intent was originally private but felt forced into public release since he basically wants to defend himself from her accusation, calling him a groomer. 6 confirmed men are listed in the document: Average Bird Enjoyer, who was a Discord mod, Merrick, a former Discord admin, Shovelbreath, another former Discord admin, Launchland, regular Discord member, and Captcha, a regular Discord member, and Sako, a former Discord admin. Bird goes on to write, "She dropped these men after she was done with them and then accused them of taking advantage of her to avoid admitting she was in a consensual sexual relationship so as not to sabotage her streaming career." For Bird, the author of the document, it all started simply. At first, he was just another name in chat, someone who cheered her on, sent her kind messages, and joined her Discord server one day after its creation. Their interactions were friendly and casual, like many other streamers with their dedicated viewers. Bird first discovered her on March 15, 2024. Their initial interaction were relatively wholesome, with Elfin appreciating his supportive marshmallow messages. After he sent her this marshmallow, they started DMing, and then he starts noticing a pattern where she is inebriated quite often and would message him while in that state. But as quickly as their friendship formed, the dynamic shifted. One night, while she was drinking during a voice call, a boundary was crossed that could never be taken back. During a call while she was drunk, Bird told her she was a good girl and that he loved her, something she seemed to want to hear. And then the unthinkable happened. At some point during April 3rd to 6th, Elfin was drunk in a call, sending me explicit images of herself completely unprompted. I asked her if she wanted me to delete them. She said yes, and I deleted them after saving them in case I ever needed proof. Which Is honestly a little weird that your first reaction is to start gathering evidence when you meet somebody, but I digress. The next day, she would claim she didn't remember anything when she sobered up, which the author of the dog believes is something Elfin would often try to do. In one instant, a wholesome streamer-viewer connection morphed into something sexual, and it wasn't just words either. And at one point she messaged, honestly, some stuff it's not even worth sharing because most of it would be censored, and we've gone way above the censoring budget for this video already. But just to give you an idea, this drunken message, for example, translates to Elfin telling me if I touch her she'd come real fast. But, you know, just the usual Discord kitten, call me good girl stuff. At one point, he even claimed she sent him a selfie of her face, which he also claims he deleted out of principle. The author goes on to say that at this point, the relationship got much closer. Sometimes she would to his voice in call. He claims he did not participate and she was likely drunk, but he writes that they called on regular basis. He also says at one point in April 2024 they started discussing the idea of meeting in person, which might have been the reason why she had deleted their DMs from April 9th to May 7th. In the period of May to June, he took a trip to the UK to meet up with some old friends and then tries to get her to meet so he can give her his gifts. But she tiptoes back and forth saying she's scared of meeting people online, but then going to, I wouldn't mind meeting, but if I'm sober, I'll be a nervous wreck. And then she would eventually give a soft okay. However, she would end up backing out of that meeting, which is something the author claims he doesn't hold against her. However, something else happened during this trip. While he was traveling, Bird received a DM from another viewer who wanted to talk about Elfin and another fan, Merrick, who was also a former Discord admin. The message explained that Elfin often spent time in voice calls with Merrick and that things between them got pretty intimate. Apparently, she a few times to his positive affirmations, and he would send her audio recordings of himself for comfort. But eventually, they had a falling out. The person messaging Bird warned him that Merrick might try to defame both Elfin and Bird out of spite. They also mentioned that Elfin had deleted all her DMs with Merrick because she was scared of getting hacked, meaning that there was no direct evidence of what happened, only this person's account. He ended up talking directly to Merrick. That's when Bird discovered that Elfin had while in call with Merrick, apparently while drunk. During their conversation, Bird and Merrick shared the private DMs she had sent each of them. When Bird confronted Elfin about it, she didn't react with remorse or embarrassment. Instead, she got angry that they were even discussing it behind her back. At the time, Bird writes, I found her reaction a bit odd because she seemed more upset at me for discussing her private affairs than with the people leaking this information. But as you will see later, the deflection of blame as well as the attempts at victimizing herself will be consistently present. She would then go on to write this apology explaining her side of the story. She described how her late night calls with Merrick started casually, both of them drinking together, but said that he drank far more than she did. She admitted that she often got, quote, absolutely hammered, end quote, and wouldn't remember anything the next morning. She told him she hated that feeling. She deleted everything between them and cut him off completely, telling him she didn't want it to go anywhere because she didn't like it. And he agreed. But then, as she describes it, he told someone else about what happened, despite her asking him not to. She says, I'm pissed at everyone. I know I have issues. I know I'm an alcoholic, which is exactly why I cut everyone off. I don't want people getting uncomfy of me using my drunken state to their advantage. She claimed she now drinks alone and logs out of Discord to avoid this situation, saying, I try my best. I really am trying. I'm sorry to have caused any pain. I didn't mean it. These are my personal issues and I'm trying to get better. After Elfin shared how Merrick encouraged her drinking and made her feel used, Bird responded calmly, saying he wasn't trying to take advantage of her and valued their friendship. He admitted he had feelings for her but told her their genuine conversation meant more than anything romantic. Looking back, he noted things were awkward after this, but they stayed friends, though never as close, and she didn't directly reject him at the time despite later claiming she did so. After learning about what happened between Elfin and Merrick, Average Bird Enjoyer starts to spiral. He began making more self-deprecating and suicidal jokes than usual, clearly affected by the situation. So in July, he decides to have a friend named Otaku act as a go-between him and Elfin to try to figure out how he stands towards her. Does she like him? Are they in a relationship? So Otaku talks to Elfin to try to get clarifications on Bird's behalf on whether or not she likes him or if she'd be interested in a platonic relationship with him. But Elfin sounds frustrated and keeps repeating that she's already given him a clear answer, all the while refusing to explain what she meant. To Bird, this was proof of her constant vagueness. He said he never even asked her directly about being in a relationship, yet here she was acting like she had given him a clear rejection. For him, it was just another example of how she avoided direct answers while stringing him along and claiming later that she'd been upfront. By early September, Bird had booked his second trip to the UK to visit Elfin. They agreed he'd arrive just before Christmas, and he even planned out Michelin star restaurants to take her to. In his mind, this wasn't about romance or trying to sleep with her, it was about giving his friend experiences she had always wanted but felt she couldn't do alone. But during this month, her behavior shifted dramatically. After months of quiet distance following the Merrick situation, Elfin started sending him photos of herself again, selfies, cute pictures, and when he didn't respond fast enough, she reacted with visible disappointment, as if craving his validation. To Bird, it felt like all of her old patterns had returned: the blurred lines, the need for attention, the subtle flirtation, just as he was about to fly across the world to see her. But among all the blurred boundaries and emotional manipulation, some of the darkest messages between Elfin and Bird revealed an even more unsettling side. In private, their conversation sometimes turned deeply uncomfortable. Screenshots in the document show Elfin talking openly about rape fantasies and non-consensual degradation. She described these scenarios casually, as if they were just another part of her day-to-day thoughts. For Bird, these conversations were disturbing. He saw them as further signs of her chaotic mental state, her tendency towards extreme sexual degradation, and her disregard for normal boundaries in relationships. And it didn't stop here. In another screenshot, Elfin casually used the hard N-word in conversation. Bird included this in the document to show how she spoke privately, unfiltered, offensive, and with no awareness of the consequences. These messages painted a picture of someone whose entire online persona blurred into her private life. Someone who said shocking things without hesitation and lived perpetually at the edge of self-destruction. At the same time, two other figures entered the narrative: Captcha and a fan named Shovel Breath. Shovel was someone Bird never trusted. He saw him as a sleazy liar, and I'm not making this up, by the way, he literally says those words, who openly joked about wanting to watch Elfin's community burn. As a moderator, Bird had to take comments like that seriously. He repeatedly warned Elfin that Shovel was a red flag, but she always dismissed his concerns. Then, in late September, something else changed. Shovel began making pointed cuck jokes towards Bird, implying that Bird only disliked him because he saw Shovel as competition, saying things like, "Oh, you just don't like me because you view me as a threat." It was subtle at first, but increasingly direct, and this made Bird realize that it was blatantly obvious Elfin and Shovel were talking privately in DMs, intimately. On September 25th, Bird noticed Elfin and Shovel in a voice call together. She mentioned casually that Shovel was going to stream some Russian cartoons for her to watch. There was no mention of this in any public channel, meaning it was coordinated in private DMs. To Bird, the optics were dangerous. Elfin was a public figure, and after what happened with Merrick, he feared Shovel was another person taking advantage of her vulnerability behind the scenes. Concerned, he pulled her aside into a call, explaining how suspicious it looked. Shovel, who rarely spoke truthfully, just so happened to be taking a college course featuring Russian cartoons, and just so happened to DM her about it privately. Bird worried it was manipulative. It's difficult to know whether this was motivated by lingering feelings toward her or because of genuine concern for her well-being. Elfin seemed to understand, and after their talk, she finally unfriended Shovel. For Bird, it felt like the issue was resolved, at least for now. But among all the complicated relationships Elfin maintained, none were quite as chaotic and destructive as her interactions with Captcha. Captcha was another fan in her community who, like Bird, became deeply attached to her. Bird first notices that she seemed to be posting an earnest in his containment thread, incel maxing about woman-related issues. Woman-related issues he believed were Elfin. There was one day where Captcha said something along the lines of, "Oh, it's so frustrating when women are given the answer to all of their problems, but they don't want to take it." And Elfin got exceptionally mad at this comment. Bird stepped in to mediate. He calmed Elfin down and messaged Captcha privately, explaining that his vague posts were making her feel targeted and attacked. He told Captcha to apologize sincerely, even if it wasn't long or detailed, just enough to show her he didn't mean harm. But Captcha's response showed his mindset. He said that he was glad she explained things to Bird because she never told him anything directly. He questioned whether she even cared enough to deserve an apology, asking Bird if she only mentioned it because he brought it up. For Bird, this was another red flag, proof that Captcha's attachment to Elfin was less about friendship and more about validation, obsession, and resentment. He would eventually get banned at Elfin's request a few months later, but that wouldn't be the end of him. As the year was winding down, Bird didn't notice anything too alarming in Elfin's behavior, at least not until early December. But Captcha's presence in the community was never straightforward. Around December 4th, when everyone's account were getting strangely suspended, a theory emerged. Sako, another Discord admin, messaging from his alt account named Kazu, told Bird that he suspected Captcha was behind it all, mass reporting accounts under an alt. And Bird found this believable, considering Captcha's history of erratic behavior and bitterness towards Elfin. They start discussing it further. Sako, aka Kazu, explains that on the day both his and Elfin's account were hit, Captcha had been messaging her on Twitter, and given his reputation and past incidents, it all lined up. Bird and Sako's conversation painted a grim picture. Captcha had been deeply parasocial, confessing feelings, becoming obsessive, and eventually threatening Elfin. According to Sako, Elfin told him Captcha even threatened to dox her if she didn't unban him. Apparently he was banned and unbanned repeatedly because he would whine about it hard enough and say he went to therapy. Bird wondered aloud if Elfin was intimidated by these threats. Sako didn't think so, but the whole ordeal reeked of desperation. They also theorized whether Captcha's threat held any weight. Had she already trusted him with personal information, or was he just bluffing? They weren't sure, but one thing was clear. Captcha's involvement added another layer of instability to Elfin's already volatile inner circle. Every day, new secrets and betrayals seemed to bubble to the surface, and Bird was left trying to piece it all together before everything came crashing down. So Bird takes this seriously. He reaches out to Elfin and messaged her on her own alt since her main had also been suspended. Concerned, Bird pulled her into a private call to talk about the situation. During that call, he took notes, trying to piece together exactly what had happened. But as she spoke, he just couldn't shake the feeling that she was only telling him half the truth. Her story felt incomplete. She admitted parts of it, like Captcha had sent Elfin memes, they talked, he confessed his feelings, and when she gently rejected him, he didn't take it well. He began insult maxing publicly, posting about her in the server, and even threatening to dox her because he had her Instagram, which contained at least one face picture. He said something twisted along the lines of, "I didn't want to miss out because she was cute and it would have been easier if she was ugly." After that, Elfin blocked and banned him, but Captcha kept coming back on multiple alts, sending vague threats and having people on the server relay information back to him. But when Bird asked her why she didn't want him to know, she reluctantly replied that she just didn't like telling everything. Bird found it odd. This was serious. A man was threatening to dox her, yet she seemed evasive and strangely casual about it. Still, with his flight to the UK only 3 weeks away, he didn't want to start a fight so close to meeting her in person, and finally, December came. Bird flew out on the 22nd, landing in the UK the next day, and during this second visit, they spent time together every other day. Elfin, being agoraphobic to a degree, needed breaks between outings, but their days were filled with quiet moments. Michelin-star restaurants in London, anime figure shopping, wandering Chinatown, trying and failing to build a bear at Build-A-Bear due to the holiday crowds, and even building her new PC. But it was during that trip, after months of emotional entanglement, that she gave him what he describes as her first straightforward rejection, which he didn't even get rejected face to face, mind you. He got it via a mediator. She told the mediator that she doesn't want a relationship with Bird, and the mediator told him. Awkward. After Bird's visit to the UK ended, things seemed to quiet down for a moment, but it didn't last long. One day, not too long after his return, Bird received a drunken call from Sako. At first it was casual. Sako was rambling about someone in the server who was apparently digging up Elfin's old information, suggesting that this person might become a problem later on. But then the conversation shifted. Sako sent Bird a screenshot from VT, one of those typical gossip post claiming Elfin does XYZ, and Bird didn't care to remember the exact words. But what struck him was Sako's reaction. Despite being drunk, he started saying things like, "Man, some of these things kinda line up." Curious, Bird pressed him. He asked what exactly Sako meant. Did he have proof? Was there anything behind these rumors? As they talked deeper into the night, Bird realized something unsettling. Both he and Sako had been through eerily similar experiences with Elfin. They both knew intimate details about her personal life. They had both received her nudes at some points, and she had acted flirtatious and sexual with both of them. The realization was like a cold slap of water. Their entire conversation boiled down to two major takeaways. One, they needed answers. Bird gave Sako a list of people he suspected she was juggling: himself, Merrick, Shovel, Captcha, and Sako. And he wanted Sako to bring it up to her to see if she'd admit the truth. More than anything, he wanted to know what she really thought of him. Was he just a source of money? Did she even care about him as a person? He decided if her response showed that she only kept him around out of convenience or greed, he would leave her life immediately. But two, they recognized the pattern. Both men sighed clearly now. The cycle, the way she would pull someone in and become their world, and when their usefulness was over, just quietly discard them. They knew it was only a matter of time before Sako's time ran out too, and when that happened, Bird planned to confront her in private, end it all, and finally be done with this exhausting web of manipulation. Soon after, Sako would go back to Elfin and confirms Bird's list of people, the quiet players in her behind-the-scenes reality. By mid-March, everything reached a boiling point. On March 17th, Sako was finally banned. For Bird, this was the catalyst, the final push she needed to begin unraveling the truth, no matter how ugly it would be. He decided to start reaching out to people, to connect the dots once and for all. One of the first people he messaged was Lil Bean. Bird knew Lil Bean was close with Captcha. They had played VR chat together before, and he assumed this would be a chance to get just Captcha's side of the story to fill in minor gaps. But what he found was something far beyond what he expected. Lil Bean wasn't just another server member with half-remembered anecdotes. No, he turned out to hold nearly all the missing pieces: screenshots, context, dates, conversations Bird had never seen. With Lil Bean's insight, everything finally fell into place. For the first time, Bird could see the entire twisted mosaic of Elfin's private life. Her lies, her games, her careful manipulation of each person, it was all laid out in front of him with devastating clarity. And from that moment forward, there was no going back. As Bird kept digging, Lil Bean became this unexpected informant. Bean told him about a call that took place on November 8th. It was a small private call with Shovel, Elfin, and Launchland. They pulled Bean in for one reason: to help them deal with Captcha. According to Elfin, Captcha had been harassing her for months, relentlessly trying to get unbanned from the server. She painted him as an obsessed outcast, desperate for any form of contact, even if it was just an argument. But as Bird listened to Bean recount the details of that call, something felt off. Why were these people gathering together, strategizing, sharing private screenshots, and building coordinated narratives behind closed doors? Was this really about protecting Elfin from harassment, or was it about controlling the story before the truth could slip? This was only the beginning of what Bean would reveal. Bird would come to learn that the story Elfin told about Captcha wasn't just incomplete, it was almost entirely a lie. When he finally spoke directly to Captcha, the truth unraveled like a rotten thread pulled from an old sweater. Captcha described how around August and September, he and Elfin were incredibly close. They spent countless nights in calls together, gaming, watching movies, sharing vulnerable moments. He says it felt like they were dating. She even sent him explicit photos and lewd messages. Captcha generally thought there was love there. And then suddenly, everything flipped. In the span of just a few weeks, Elfin's entire demeanor changed. She went cold, distant, brushing off his attempts to understand what was wrong. Every time he asked, she acted like nothing had happened, leaving him desperately confused, clinging to any scraps of affection she offered. Eventually, when Captcha finally confronted her, broken and angry, her reaction was explosive. She accused him of manipulating her, called him a predator, and tried to spin the narrative that she was the victim all along. What horrified Captcha most was how she tried to weaponize her trauma against him. She allegedly admitted to him that she used to masturbate to her dead dad. What the fuck? Then when he questioned if this was true or another manipulation tactic, she told him to kill himself, claiming he'd burn in hell for even believing that. It was mind-bending level of gaslighting. Captcha says she'd send lewd photos to others behind his back while telling him how much she cared about him. When caught, she twisted everything to frame him as an obsessive freak, even though he still cared about her deeply despite everything. And to top it off, Captcha shared that while she presented herself online as a broken and self-loathing, and in private she was boastful about her own popularity and status, bragging about how powerful she felt in her community. This conversation confirmed to Bird that the tangled web Elfin spun for each of her orbiters wasn't just messy, it was deliberate. As Bean continued piecing together the puzzle, he realized that Captcha's claims weren't just plausible, they were disturbingly consistent with what others had reported. Captcha explained how in September he, Shovelbreath, and Launchland all discovered a horrifying truth. Elfin had been sexting and sending nudes to all three of them simultaneously. To each one, she played the same game, subtly implying that he was special, different, the only one who truly understood her brokenness. She never explicitly called them boyfriends, but her messages left little doubt that she was implying exclusivity. Feeling betrayed and disgusted, Captcha, Shovel, and Launchland formed a group chat to compare their experiences. The betrayal was undeniable. In a moment of confrontation, Captcha messaged Elfin while in a call with the others to cross-reference her responses live. This was the point where Elfin's manipulation became crystal clear to them. She confessed how Launchland, who already had a girlfriend, asked her for sexual interactions while she was drunk and vulnerable. She told Captcha, "I said I can't do this, man. I never wanted to. I was stupid and drunk, dude." She claimed she never wanted any of it, swearing that she wasn't into poly shit. Captcha, bitter and resentful, accused her of simply moving on to the next toy whenever she got bored of the last. Elfin defensively lashed back, insisting she was never truly into any of them. They didn't even know her real name, and when she drank now, she did it offline to avoid exactly these kind of situations. But Captcha wasn't convinced. He called her out directly. "You use and discard people and fucking throw them away to go to the next guy." Elfin coldly simply confirmed she never told them anything real about herself. To Bird, it felt like, for her, all of this was just transactional. As Captcha pressed her harder, her narrative crumbled. She lashed out, screaming lines like, "27-year-old man talking to a drunk girl and dared the victims? Lamau." Throughout the exchange, Captcha called out her contradictions, accusing her of using and discarding people like trash. She insisted she knew what she did was wrong, but continued to pivot blame back onto others, especially Shovel and Launchland, whom she accused of grooming her, while simultaneously claiming she was aware and regretful. Her response shifted rapidly between defensive, apologetic, manipulative, and outright rage-filled as Captcha broke through her excuses. He called her a manipulator to her face. She tried to guilt-trip him, saying he knew her real name and she was trying to be better. But Captcha ended with brutal finality. "It's too late, man. What done is done." And keep in mind that throughout this conversation, everything was being relayed by Captcha to the other two guys. So as they learned all of these additional stuff she was saying about them, calling them a groomer, for example, their anger only grew and grew. After the revelations about her interactions with Shovelbreath, Launchland, and Captcha, Elfin finds herself backed into a corner as she is added to a group message with all three men. She starts by trying to explain herself. "Whatever happened with Shovel was my fault. I engaged it. I shouldn't have talked to him about philosophy or my life or anything. Wherever it went was bad, and I didn't like it, and I got uncomfy, but it was my own fault for engaging with anyone like that in the first place." She then continues, shifting to Launchland. "With Lodge, I was really fucking wasted, but it was again my fault for keeping up in DMs when I shouldn't have as a content creator. I should have kept my distance, but you kind of just went with it despite having a girlfriend. I felt so fucking awful when I sobered up, I just wanted to be nice." Finally, on Captcha. "With Captcha, I genuinely liked him, and I know we went far, but I realize how fucked it is. The distance, the way I can't handle this since I'm emotionally immature. I felt fucky to get attached to someone I can't even meet, so I stopped." But the men weren't buying it. At one point, as she tried to minimize her responsibility, she even admits, "I made the mistake of reaching out when I shouldn't have." Captcha immediately replied, mocking her phrasing, "Reaching out?" And Shovelbreath cut in with precision. No, it's not reaching out that's the problem. Elfin tried to defend herself. You can ask both of them how I started talking. It wasn't flirtatious. Captcha snapped back with brutal clarity. Does all of your reaching out lead to you whoring yourself out after a span of a few hours? Ouch. Then Shovelbreath dropped what might have been the most damning line in this entire conversation. The issue is that the next day we talked about it and you were sober and clarified, and we continued to do things while you were sober. And that was almost identical to what Bird had described earlier. That Elfin would engage with him drunkenly one night and then continue everything just as intimately the next day, sober, with no memory loss to blame. This group message was a confrontation that left none of them feeling vindicated, only disgusted at the web of deception they had all willingly stepped into. But while all of this was unfolding, there was another player operating behind the scenes, Sako. It became clear that Sako's entire motivation was to cling to Elfin as tightly as possible. Allegedly, Sako had already been banned from her server at one point, but continued to stay involved privately, leaking messages from Bird to Elfin while also discussing the situation with Bird himself. And they started sexting, according to Sako, around mid-January. Sako wasn't just clinging to Elfin, he was playing both sides. He gave Elfin the logs of his DMs with Bird, and as a result, Elfin began scrambling to mitigate the damage, racing to talk to people before Bird could, using a partial list of names he had given to Sako as a roadmap. At the same time, Sako was deliberately muddying the waters on his way out. For example, Sako once sent Elfin's face unprompted to another server member. That person tried to be cheeky in the response, but the entire exchange read horribly. Hey, what face picture of Elfin did Bird send you? To which the other person replied, the ones you sent me, so the ones he sent you. But Sako used this to twist this into a lie, sending the exchange to Elfin to make it look like Bird was actually the one distributing her photos. This fueled a rumor that Bird was doxing her images around the community, a rumor that still circulates even after the truth was clarified in DMs. Bird showcases one example of her retelling these rumors to a third party. If I told you everything, I don't think you'd like Bird very much. I have no power though. I'm a streamer, he's got everything on me. I can't do much but either kill myself or have someone come and kill me once I'm doxed. Curious though, was it Sako or Bird that sent you pics of me? The other person responds, Sako. Right, he told me Bird sent them to you, so everyone just loves lying, I guess. Bird explains that he only ever traded pictures with Sako himself, at Sako's request, in a message phrase like, since we're going down this path anyway, wanna trade pics? In doing so, Bird realized something important. Elfin was sending the exact same pictures to multiple people, a detail that would become relevant later. However, Sako wiped his DMs, leaving Bird without the original evidence. And while Sako was feeding Elfin selective information, she was using it to strategically shape her narrative. She would tell different stories to different people, even third parties attempting to mediate, obfuscating the truth each time. Then, the document shifts into a conversation she is having with Lil Bean, which, of course, is also being reported to Bird. Originally, when Bean was brought in to help out Elfin with Captcha's harassment, Bean assumed that Shovel and Launchland were both third parties, just like him, who just happened to be helping Elfin deal with this issue. But it's not until way later in January that he would come to realize that Shovel, Launchland, Elfin, and Captcha were all directly related in terms of their entanglement with Elfin and each other. Once he realized that and shared info with Bird, he would then confront Elfin directly. In one conversation, Elfin laments, my biggest mistake was talking and trusting to people I talk to every day in VC. I don't see them as fans, I saw you guys as friends. I know now I never should have thought that. But Bird's ally, Lil Bean, wasn't buying it. He replied bluntly, Elf, quit the bullshit. I read through all of 16,000 messages between you and Bird from March to December. It took me 7 hours, but I was able to prove every statement Bird has told me, and disprove all the main things you have tried to say. Your story has so many blatant contradictions, of course I'm not on your side. Elfin, meanwhile, would argue that her age and position meant she couldn't be abusing power, stating things like, I'm not some old celebrity, I'm a 20-year-old girl who's chronically online because I talk to 0 people IRL. She also repeatedly clung to the notion that she had rejected Bird multiple times, often citing a single example from December, which Bird seems really frustrated with. But Lil Bean called out the flaw in that logic, pointing out how everything she had done to Bird had occurred before that supposed rejection. And Elfin's response? How does it matter what happened if there's a straight rejection? Are you stupid? Bird goes on to write that it's clear this entire rejection defense from Elfin hinges on a single conversation they had in December where she clearly rejected him. But for Bird, that didn't excuse any of her behavior leading up to that point. Throughout these logs, he writes that Elfin refused to acknowledge any responsibility for how her actions impacted others. At one point, Bean calls her out directly, saying, "Again, I know what you guys talked about in September, I know you're lying," but she doubles down, insisting, "I have a literal blatant rejection in December." Then, almost as if to pivot away from the topic entirely, she throws this out. Yes, it was a conversation about rape. It was a convo about rape and how it would be funny if you raped me or some shit. I saw the logs, dude. There's a rejection in December. After that, he should have realized I don't like him that way. Bean, clearly frustrated, points out the contradiction. And also you saying that he was cucking you because he faps to other women. If you find all this stuff so uncomfortable, how on earth are you okay with all of this? She continues arguing. Do you sincerely think all those months of me not even trying to flirt with him is remotely leading him on? I'll be honest, I've had lapses of judgment when I would send pictures of my face, like in September, where I need validation. And I'll be honest, I lack self-esteem and constantly crave validation from others. But generally speaking, how is the December rejection not enough eventually? Bean presses her again. Yes, but when was the rejection obvious? Tell me. But instead of answering, she deflects. I've already explained so many times, let me explain one last time. And if you don't open your mind outside of this fucking bias, I'm gonna stop trying. Bird writes that she then posted a long summarization, filled with half-truths and blatant lies that, as he puts it, anyone reading the full context would be able to point out. To her, that December rejection was her golden ticket out of accountability for everything before it. But to Bird, it simply showed how desperate she was to rewrite the timeline in her favor. Elfin described how her relationship with Bird began to shift back in April. In April, him and I got close. I will say, looking back, calling me while drunk and asking me extremely personal questions is extremely weird. I hope you realize how fucked that is. Moving on, I started trusting him a lot. He was helping me with money, my mental health, everything. I generally thought he cared with no ulterior motives. It was like a dad, generally. After April, the realization hit how fucked the situation was. I felt like I kind of fell into the trap of getting money from someone. Pretty much becoming their slave or something. To her, it felt like she was becoming trapped, supported financially, emotionally, and practically, but with an unspoken sense of obligation tying her down. Later, Bean would relay these messages to Bird. In them, Elfin talked about Merrick dismissively, saying, "I'm pretty sure I had a thing with Merrick, but that's a different issue." She described their cancelled meetup by saying, "I didn't want to at all, despite months of planning and excitement leading up to his visit." And she added, "He's now depressed that I didn't meet," framing Bird as simply upset about the cancelled trip, omitting the context that he had also discovered her other relationships at the time. She claimed he was the only person I could send my selfies to, despite having sent the same picture to multiple people, and kept repeating the phrase, "Oh my god, someone thinks I'm not ugly," a line she had used before with others like Shovel Breath, Launchland, and Captcha. She also justified deleting her account by saying, "I completely deleted my account because I was in a sketchy server," though in other conversations she had stated it was to start fresh with a clean state. Finally, she wrote, "I don't like Bird being my manager," despite previously being comfortable with it. Later, she would claim Otaku forced her into it, despite his threat of quitting clearly being a joke at the time. Bird goes on to write that, in the aftermath of everything, Elfin's pattern became painfully clear to him, deflecting blame, playing the victim, and trying to regain control. Bean offered to go through the logs of their group chat with her, but she kept pivoting, asking repeatedly for the logs herself instead. Bird noted how she manipulated the situation, first agreeing to go through them live on stream, and then shifting to demand them in private, insinuating that Bird was deleting messages. She also brought up doxing concerns, which are valid concerns, and she claimed that Bird had shared her address with others. However, Bird insists this was untrue, clarifying that the only personal information he ever saw or shared was her first name, never her address as she claimed. What disturbed Bird further was how, when confronted about never shutting down sexual conversations, she deflected again, saying that over 50 people have told her they climaxed to her, and she never cut any of them off. I don't think that's a good look. And to Bird, this painted a clear picture of someone maintaining parasocial sexual bonds while refusing responsibility for the emotional fallout. She even argued that Bean couldn't criticize her because he wasn't a VTuber, or that sexual advances were different from romantic ones, diving into semantics to avoid the core issue. In the final part of his document, Bird summarized the entire timeline, from the Merrick saga in May and June to the Shovel, Launchland, and Captcha revelations in September, to her lesson learned statements in January that were immediately contradicted by her continued sexting with Sako shortly after. As his closing thoughts, Bird says that once he learned the full truth, he realized keeping it private would only let the cycle continue, and someone would eventually get hurt. He felt the only option was to make it public so people could decide for themselves. In his words, Elfinpsyop wasn't dating any of us. She can do what she wants privately, but lying, slandering, and accusing people of grooming just to protect herself is unacceptable. He ends by saying he hopes people at least understand why he felt this had to be done. Following the release of this explosive document, Elfin felt like she had to make a statement and goes live on stream to explain her side of the story. She opens her now deleted stream with her signature ironic demeanor, shifting abruptly to the serious topic at hand. She explained to viewers that her Discord moderator, Bird, had released a 51-page document exposing private interactions she'd had with multiple men in her community. She framed it almost mockingly, saying, "My Discord moderator wrote a 51-page document about yours truly, an exposé about the things I've done over the past year." From the outset, she maintained a dismissive yet anxious tone, telling viewers, "Most of the TLDRs I've seen on Twitter are so disgustingly wrong, it's so easy to disprove all of this." She said she felt forced to respond publicly because people were spreading what she describes as blatant misinterpretations. Elfin openly admitted that she did talk to multiple men, describing them as close friends she spoke to daily in Discord voice chats. "I'm not denying that I talked to people," she says. "I literally did talk to people. They were really close friends." However, she vehemently denied the document's central implication, that these relationships overlapped romantically or sexually. She insisted, "None of the guys I talked to were overlapping, literally none of them. All these guys I talked to were spread over a whole year. Most of them were months apart." She argued that Bird provided no proof, no evidence, nothing to support his claims that she was engaging with multiple people at the same time, characterizing the entire narrative as ridiculous. She emphasized, "I need to hammer this point down. None of them overlap. There's proof of one of the guys literally admitting, 'Elfin told me she doesn't want anything more. She told me she's not taking this anywhere further and I just went with it. I have screenshot," she adds. She also addressed people comparing her situation to that of Gunpei, who I've made another video on, who is another VTuber exposed for overlapping parasocial relationships. Pushing back firmly, she says, "It really isn't the same. I was never a GFE YouTuber. I never dated anyone. I'm still not dating anyone. I don't even have a fansly." She criticized the wording in the document as cherry-picked, explaining that she kept calling these people her viewers, but she considered them friends, and she spoke to them every day. "I was always online in my Discord voice call because I can't be alone in my room. I get hallucinations and paranoia if I'm alone. So I was there all the time. These people were my friends. Calling them my viewers I targeted is insane. All of them were older than me." She then described her life circumstances at the time. She was working 2 jobs, isolated, and completely new to the VTubing culture. When the Idol Bros and Boo Bros community members joined her stream, they taught her everything about how VTubing worked. She admitted, "Literally, I had no idea they shaped my entire perspective on how VTubing works," and Bird was pretty much the closest one. She recounted how Bird told her about Yuko and idol streaming controversies. Yuko Yurei was another VTuber who had a very strong parasocial fanbase, but who ended up getting burned by it. But Elfin adds that she didn't even know what GFE content meant. She said, "If you're in my shoes getting showered with money when you can't afford anything, and this guy is there for emotional support, saying, 'I will support you with whatever you need, whatever you want,' you're just kind of inclined to be like, 'Holy shit, thank you.'" She described feeling overwhelmed and isolated with no friends or family to rely on in real life. I was working 2 jobs. I was exhausted. When I got told, it's okay, we'll help you, we'll support you no matter what, it was kind of crazy for me. I was losing my marbles. At this point, it's hard not to see the parasocial nightmare forming. A lonely girl oversharing with equally lonely men, each feeding into each other's worst instincts. She craved validation and intimacy, and they craved her attention and vulnerability. And when everything collapsed, everyone felt betrayed. And for Elfin, this was the reality behind the DMs and support Bird offered her. She framed herself not as a manipulator, but as a lonely, vulnerable streamer grateful for help, blindsided when private moments were turned against her in a public exposé. She tried to dismantle the framing of her as a predator or manipulator, insisting that none of the men involved were victims, and emphasized that they were all consenting adults, notably older than her. Half of these people were 25 plus, including Bird himself. Calling me a predator is insane when you're much older than me and much more experienced. She added that Bird also went around telling people he didn't see her self-harm scars, so she must be lying about them. She said that was insane and cruel to say about someone. She stated bluntly that Bird's intention were for her career to be over. She said he himself admitted she wouldn't feel secure or recover, and that he wanted her to lose everything she built up. She further clarified, there were 2 blatant rejections, maybe more. He kept saying I let him on, but I rejected him clearly multiple times. She goes on to explain that Bird kept trying to meet her in real life, buying plane tickets and offering to be her caretaker, but she kept saying no. She questioned why, if she manipulated these guys so badly, people like Sako still helped her and most of her Discord friends didn't hate her. She admitted to sending selfies and nudes to some of them while drunk, but said, you're not being manipulated if you choose to keep talking to someone drunk who's being a gooner. You can't call yourself a victim when you're older than me and fully aware. She also denied having financial motives in these interactions, clarifying that Bird was the only person who donated money to her. She said his friend told her Bird donated with no romantic or sexual motives, just to help her as a friend. But in the end, she felt this document proved that was a lie. She described Bird as someone who acted normal to her face while scheming behind her back, going around to her friends and poisoning her community. She also adds that he never confronted her directly about any of this, framing it as a moral obligation instead. She accused him of wanting to destroy her. His intentions were for my career to be over. He wanted me to lose everything I built up over this past year. At several points, she addresses the explicit pictures she sent while drunk, claiming that she asked him to delete them the next morning, but found out from the document that he had saved them for future evidence, which disgusted her. She concluded by reiterating that none of the men overlapped, none were manipulated, and none gave her money except Bird. She took responsibility for trusting people she shouldn't have, but refused to accept the label of manipulator. I do not take responsibility for you saying you got manipulated by me, because you didn't. Throughout the stream, she alternated between mocking Bird's perceived self-righteousness and lamenting how isolated and betrayed she felt, framing the ordeal as a harsh lesson about parasocial relationships and trusting online communities. She closed by apologizing to her viewers for dragging them into this drama, reiterating that she hoped to continue streaming despite losing many friends. Her final tone was a mix of exhausted, apologetic, and defiant. I'm sorry for bringing this drama into your lives. None of it will happen again. I'll never stop being a fucking idiot, but I will stop trusting people. And then she ended her stream with her final advice, which became sort of iconic in its own way.
Biggest statement though, never goon. Never fucking goon. It will always end badly.
When this scandal erupted, even more damaging rumors started to swirl, specifically that Elfin might actually be a rebrand of Mel Nekomara, a previous VTuber accused of scamming her audience before disappearing. In fact, it went so far that Elfin and Mel were supposedly planning to do a collab stream together just to kill those rumors once and for all. But there hasn't been any substantial evidence to prove this claim, and many people have noted their voices are noticeably different. Still, that's a rabbit hole for another time, because honestly this video is already way too long. But reflecting on this entire situation, it really makes you wonder about the degree of responsibility here. On one hand, you have a girl who is clearly unwell, deeply lonely, mentally unstable, and thrown into a position of influence and attention she wasn't prepared for. I think many people online can relate to that feeling of being starved for validation. But at the same time, Is that really an excuse? Should she have been sending explicit pictures while drunk to viewers, making sexual jokes with them, and then later framing them as predators or spreading damaging claims about them? It's a complicated situation where both parties carry fault. She was irresponsible and reckless with people's feelings, but some of these men were also fully aware adults willingly engaging in sexual conversations with someone younger and clearly unstable. Not to mention, they shared some of her most sensitive information and photos together. While I understand them wanting to clear their names, I still don't see why sharing those images would be necessary to accomplish that. In the end, this entire scandal highlights the danger of parasocial relationships going both ways. When streamers rely on their fans for emotional support and fans become emotionally invested far beyond normal boundaries, it creates the perfect storm for manipulation, betrayal, and irreversible damage. But what do you think? Was Elfin simply a lonely girl trapped by her own bad decisions? Or did she intentionally manipulate the people who cared about her? Or was this entire expose just a revenge of a scorned lover? Let me know your thoughts in the comment below. And if you enjoyed today's breakdown and want to support the channel, make sure to like the video, subscribe, and hit that bell icon so you never miss a future upload. And if you want exclusive videos, anime reacts, and unfiltered commentary I can't post here on YouTube, check out my Patreon linked in the description below. Your support helps keep these deep dives going every single week. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Shovel breath. I don't know if I need to say all of that. At some point during April 3rd to 6th, I'm just gonna say, and then the unthinkable happened. At one point, she messaged honestly some stuff it's not even worth sharing because most of it would be censored, and we're already way over budget with this video and this. And at one point, she messaged. I'm gonna redo the last sentence. Oh shit! Okay, I need to redo these 3 paragraphs. Chinatown, trying and failing to build a bear at Build-A-Bear due to trying and failing to build a bear at Build-A-Bear due to, I can't say this, fuck. The only one who truly understood her brokenness. She never explicitly called them boyfriends. So not brokenness, not brokenness. She confessed how Launchland, who already had a she confessed how. Can I say this? No, I think this is too repetitive. I'll remove this paragraph. With launch, it was. This sentence doesn't make sense.